So we're just going to do the review of this week's daf, which is Tez Zayin Amud Beis and Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay, so Tez Zayin Amud Beis starts off really at the bottom of Tez Zayin Amud Aleph, the last line on the page. So just to bring the hemshech from previous daf is that Rabbi Yochanan said that we only have two cases, Shiluch Hakan, and one other case, which it's allowed it's allowed. The Torah tells you don't do something, and if you do it, if you do transgress, if you do go against what the Torah says, then there's a way of fixing it up. And there's only two cases where you have a lav v'nitlaseh, where you're going to get malchus in an instance in which you're not mekayim naseh. Right? In other words, usually lav v'nitlaseh doesn't get malchus because if you're mekayim naseh, you don't get malchus. But if you're not mekayim naseh, or according to Rabbi Yochanan, where you mevatel aseh b'yodayim, you make it impossible for yourself to do the aseh. Right? Kozman, it's possible for you to do the aseh, so you still consider lav v'nitlaseh. Still could be remedied, it could be fixed up by the aseh. So you're not going to get malchus. But if you made it impossible for yourself to do the assay, so then there's going to be malchus. Says Rabbi Yochanan, there's only two cases. There's only shiluch hakan, that if you mevatel the assay, then you get malchus, and one other case. We tried to work out what was the other case. So the Gemara says it's oina shagirish, right? The case where someone was ma'anis somebody, and then he's got a mitzvah to marry, and he marries her, but he's got a lav, he's not allowed to divorce her. Nevertheless, if he does divorce her, the word kol yomov teaches me about moivak that you've got to remarry her. So since it's considered lav v'nitik laseh, Torah says don't divorce, and if you do, you have to make sure to remarry her. And in that case, you are going to get malchus if you mevatel laseh. How you mevatel laseh? Ultimately, the Gemara says that the only can't be that you killed the woman, because then you're not going to be chayav malchus for other reasons, because you're chayav misa. So the only scenario where you're going to get malchus is if you mevatel laseh by making a neder al das rabbin. Make a neder al das rabbin with the consent of the rabbin, with the bezdin, the people, public, and therefore you can't annul the vow. You're making it, you're not going to marry, you're not going to have enough on this woman, and therefore you've been mevatel say now you can't marry the woman anymore. That's up until now. So now the Gemara asked that l'chura, well, the previous Gemara already asked that l'chura, there's the heish v'sagzei lasher gazal mashkin. You suppose if you take the mashkin from someone's house, you need to return it to him in the evening. So what if you destroyed the mashkan? It's going to be, you made it impossible for you to keep the assay, so you should be chayav malchus. The Gemara says no. At the end of the day, you still chayav to pay money. Since you still chayav to pay money, there's no malchus for a lav anitim l'tashlum in a lav which causes you to be chayav money. So now the Gemara says kasha. What about if you stole from a ger, or you took a mashkan from a ger, and then the ger died, and you burnt the mashkan while the ger was alive? So now there's no assay of returning the mashkan. You can't pay him back because he's dead. And he has no yoshim. The ger, at least some of them, if he has no children, he has no yoshim. There's no one to give money to. So you've been mevatel laseh. The Moran says, well, you weren't really mevatel laseh because Kol's money, when you burnt the thing, you had to be chayiv money. Now the ger died, so it's just that there's no one to give the money to. But you weren't mevatel. You just you always chayiv money. It's just that she budded the ger who took a pak. Then the Gemara asks the kash, what about payah? Pasuk says, "Lo yischala pasatcha." You're not allowed to finish off the corner, but to leave it for the ani. Once if you do finish off, to harvest it. So the ani laget tazos, you have to give it to the ger. So the lav v'nitlaseh. Never the chura. What happened here too? If you mevatel asay, if you make it impossible to keep the asay, so that you grind it basically. It's from the Mishnah's mashma that you only chayav to give payah up to while it's still around. But if you grind the wheat and you make a shinoi, so then in the wheat, you're not going to be chayav to give pay anymore. So let's say you grind the wheat, so then you should get malchus for the lav of loy sechala. So the Gemara answers that it goes like Rabbi Shmuel, who says you can even be mafresh from dough, from even later you still have to be mafresh pay. Right? The Gemara still, if you ate the bread, you're going to be mevatel laseh. In other words, according to all opinions, there's always going to be a situation where you're going to somehow make it impossible to be able to. There's going to be a situation where you make it impossible for you to be mekayim the mitzvah asaseh of ani lager tazev, leaving the payoff for the ger after you went against the lav of leisachara, and after there should be malchus. So why are you telling me anu ein lanu elazois v'idachar? There's only shiluch hakan and one other, which is oinus shagirish. There's a third case, which is the case of payoff, that you get malchus if you eat the bread. And then you can no longer do the assay of the ani lager tazev, and you get malchus for the lav of leisachala. So the Gemara answers, you're right. The taka, this is what Rabbi Yochanan was referring to. When he says zoitz v'idachar, he meant shiluch hakan and payoff. But oinus shagirish, although we originally thought that this was what was the example of where you get malchus for lav and nitig laseh when you mevatel laseh, it's not true, because ultimately neder al das rabbim only has hafara, can only be annulled. Sorry, only cannot be annulled. There's only ein lo hafara when it's l'dvar rishus. If it's involving the dvar mitzvah, like here, where you need to get married, you've got a mitzvah to get married to. So then it's taki yesh hafara. We bring a raya in the case of a teacher who hit the students too much, and they made a neder. He's not allowed to teach anymore. Al das rabbim, and nevertheless they took him back eventually when they found that no one else could teach like him, because there's a tzorech that he needed to teach. So we see that nedal das ram, when it's a dvar mitzvah related to the dvar mitzvah, so then yesh le'afar. So ultimately, there's no way of being mevatel aseh of kol yamav, of remarrying the woman, because even if you made a neder al das rabim, yesh le'afar will be able to be annulled because it's mitzvah related. Okay, so that's that Gemara. Then the Gemara now continues to the Mishnah, back to discuss the Mishnah. Mishnah is a oichel nevelos of treifah shkatzim u'masim. You eat nevelos, treifah shkatzim u'masim, all these different things. You chayav malchus. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda says that someone who eats a type of worm, which is in a cabbage, you chayav malchus, because of the sheretz. The pasuk says sheretz the sheretz halaretz. Later we'll see it's not just one lav; it's more than one. But anything which falls into sheretz the sheretz halaretz gets a numerous malchus. 4 malchus, 5 malchus, 2 for just being a sheretz, and 3 more because of sheretz the sheretz halaretz. But either way, that's really good. So you get malchus, and the Gemara says that Yehuda was the attacker. There was a ma'aser that someone did that. He gave malchus. Showing him discuss what the chiddush is, obviously. So that's something which you need to keep in mind. What's taka the chiddush of it? We'll leave that question for the moment. And then the Gemara continues with Abaye's member. You should know how many malchus do you get if you eat a potisa. Is a sheretz hamayim. You get 4 malchus, because 2 because it's a regular sheretz, it's a sheretz, it's included in the category of sheretz, and 2 because it's sheretz hamayim. If you ate an ant, which is sheretz of the ground, not a sheretz which is in the water, so then you get 5. Why? 2 because it's considered a sheretz, and there's another 3 lavin specifically with regards to sheretz halaretz. And if it's a tzira, a hornet which flies, so then it's considered a sheretz halaretz. It goes on the ground, but it's also considered sheretz ha'oiv, attacking the 6 malchus, 2 for regular sheretz, 2 because it's considered in the general category of sheretz, 3 because it's a sheretz ha'oretz, and 1 more because it's a sheretz ha'oretz, so you end up being with 6. Okay, so Tisa is 4, lavin, ant is 5, and a hornet is 6. And then we had this related topic that this Indian with the pasuk is loisa shaksu, when it talks about eating forbidden foods, says don't make yourself disgusting. That the Chachamim learned from it. The pastors mostly showing that it's a smachta. That this loisa shaksu also refers to Alta shaks, when you do something disgusting, someone who doesn't go to the bathroom when he needs to, or he drinks, he uses a keli, which is for bloodletting, he uses it to drink from. It's disgusting, and you're over of loisha shaks, or at least midrabanan. The pasuk is understood by the Chachamim to be an allusion to these disgusting things that one's not allowed to do. Okay, right to the Gemara continues by talking about the case of someone who grinded up 9 ants, right? And now we know if the ant is whole, you get malchus for it, even if there's no kazayas, because it's a barrier. But here you crushed up the 9 ants, it's no longer a barrier, but you added 1 which was alive. And altogether it's a kazayas, so he says you get 6 malchus. Now, earlier we said an ant is 5, so why is it 6 over here? So the answer is 5 because of the barrier, 5 because of the sheretz, and the 6th one is because you're eating a kazayas neveda. Kazayas neveda. So Rabbi says in the name, no, it doesn't even have to be 9 and 1, it could be even 2 and 1. And then Rabbi says even 1 and 1, basically, there's no real dispute between them. It's just a question of how much. It's a big one, so then it can have a kazayas between 2, or if it's a little bit smaller than 3, and if necessary, it would be 10. So this is just the din that you can get malchus, besides the malchus for the sheretz ha'sheretz, you can eat a kazayas of nevela, kazayas of a dead animal, even betame animals, you chayav malchus for it. So then it continues on to talk about someone who eats tava, a nice edition. You get malchus. The question is, what does tava mean? The Pashas tava means that you didn't take truma, maisa. What happens if you took the different trumas and maisa? If you didn't take maisa ani, now why would this not be tava? The reason why this wouldn't be tava is because maisa ani is mutter for a zar to eat. There's no kedusha in it. It's just it's a chiyuv moment that you have to give the ani. You have to give the ani the maisa. So there's a havamina that, or maybe there's even deus, that maisa on tavel or maisa on is not considered tavel, you don't get malchus for it. So the Rav says you should know it's not true. Tavel or maisa oni, you do get malchus, and then we find the brayso that Taka Rabbi Yossi says that. We learn out the pasuk leisuchalecha b'shorecha, the word b'shorecha, which is used in the context of maisa oni, so that leisuchalecha b'shorecha means don't eat tavel, which has a maisa b'shorecha, meaning the maisa oni hasn't been taken, you're not allowed to eat it as well. So from that passage, Rabbi Yossi learns out that even if all the Trumas and Maisers were taken, but besides for Maisa Ani, you're still Chayav Malchus is still considered Tavel, because the possible Suchalecha Bisharecha, which from the word Bisharecha we understand it's talking about even a Bisharecha type of Maisa, which means refers to Maisa Ani. The Gemara then continues by saying that Rabbi Yosef, one of the Amiram, wants to say that this Machlokes, that this din of Rav, that Tavel Maisa Ani is considered Tavel, isn't Muskam. The Taki found the Tana Rabbi Yosef who goes like him, but there's other Tana who argue. How did Rabbi Yosef want to say that? Because there's a Machlokes, Rabbi Lezer and the Chachamim, right? That if you buy Tavua from an Amma Oretz, so in general that's considered Demai. It's considered Demai, meaning to say that it's considered Demai that the Mai Sarishan hasn't been taken. We assume that the Amma Oretz took Truma, but not that he took Mai Sarishan. So what do you have to do to Maisa? So as far as the Messina, you don't have to give the Maisa to the Levi, because since it's only a suffix, so there's no Levi who can come and claim that you owe me the Maisa, so suffix mom, and you keep it the money where it is. So you're allowed to hold on to the Maisa Rishon. You have to make sure to take the Trumas Maisa from the Maisa Rishon. You have to say that you have to say this Maisa Rishon. The question is, what about Maisa on? So Rabbi Lezer says you don't need to be koyres Hashem on Maisa on. You don't have to even separate it in your machshava, because, well, we'll soon see why. He says you don't need to. There's no issue of Maisani over here. Chacham say you do. So originally the Gemara wants to suggest, Rabbi Yosef understood that the machlokes is whether Maisani is considered tava, whether it's taka problem of eating, was taka lav eating tavel of Maisani, was it simply a chiyuv moment? In which case, in this case, there's no chiyuv moment because it's only the Maisani is safek. So that's where Rabbi Lezer says you don't have to be koyres Hashem, because there's no tavel. Chachamim hold the no tavel of Maisani is tavel. And therefore comes out that Rabbi, who earlier on said that Tavel is Maisani, only goes according to the Shit of the Chachamim, but not according to Rabbi Lezer, and it's a Leimek Tanoi, which is a bit problematic. So the Gemara answers, Abai says, no, that can't be Pshat. Why can't it be Pshat? Because if that was the case, that they were arguing about whether it's Tavel in a Vadai case, why talk about the Mai, which is a suffix, talk about regular Tavel, and say that Tavel of Maisani is not a problem, it's not Tavel. So the Gemara therefore says that for sure everyone agrees that were it to be Vadai a problem that Maisa Ani wasn't taken, and it would be considered Tavel, and you get Makkos, and all the different things. The reason over here where Rabbi Lezer says that you don't need to be carried the shame on Demai is Pashat, because the Machlokes of Lezer Chacham is just with regard to whether Amei or Aretz on Nechsha the Maisa Ani or not. And Lezer holds that Amei or Aretz gave Maisa Ani because they weren't worried. They were mafresh it. They didn't give it, sorry. They were mafresh it. Since they didn't care about stealing, but they were mafresh it, they didn't want to, and therefore there's no issue of, they knew they could be mafresh and not give it, and then it's not going to be tavel. The Rabbanan hold it, no, since it's a tirka, so it's still a tirka, they wouldn't separate it. So that's the mathematics. Then we moved on, and this is what we learned today in today's Amud, that Machlokes, the Mishnah says Machlokes Tanakam Reb Shimon, how much do you need to eat from tavel in order to be chayav? Reb Shimon says mashu, and the Chacham say kazayas. So the Machlokes Amiram over here, whether this is a Shimon that holds of everywhere, like a uniform, you always chayav for kosher, even if it was flour, or is it only to chita? So Rabbi says that it's only by chita, because it's kibriyasa, it's the way it was created. But if it's another type of food like flour, so you would be chayav only if you ate a kazayas. So Rabbi says no. Rabbi Shimon holds always that a mashal you chayav for a mashal. And then the Gemara asks the I've got a raya from the Mishnah to the first shit of Rabbi and a kasha on Rabbi Yirmiyah. What's the raya? Shimon said to the Chachamim that you hold it to kazayas for tavel. I'm saying it's a mashal. If you eat an ant, you agree to me that it's a mashal, right? And they answered back to him, yes, because it's a barrier. And he said back to him, just sagchit is also a barrier. So from this whole discussion, it's mashma that Reb Shimon was only saying that the reason why I hold it to kosher by tavel is because it's a barrier. It's chita, but if it's kamach, I would agree to you that it's a kazayas. So it's a kasha against Rev Yirmi and a raya to Rabbi. The one says no, it's no raya to. It's no kasha to Rabbi Yirmi, because Rabbi Yirmi can tell you as follows: Rabbi Shimon Bamis holds that kosher is uniform, always mashal, universally. Why was he telling to them what Rabbi Shimon was saying? You Chacham should at least agree to me in the case of chita because it's a barrier. I hold something to do with barrier. I hold this general rule that if you eat a mashal, something yichayv malchus. But you should at the very least agree to me that were it to be a chita, it should be a problem. And Rabban said no, even a chita we wouldn't agree because it's only biris neshama, which is chashuv, that has a life in it. Then it's considered a barrier, but chita is not considered a barrier. And therefore even a chita you need a kazayas. You need multiple chitas in order to be mitzaref to kazayas. One chita you won't be chayav malchus. But therefore there's no right. And then the Gemara concludes by saying that we have a brayso which says mamish like Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Reb Shimon says always kosher Makkos, and kazayis is only like carbon. The only time that if Reb Shimon holds it, you need to have a kazayis in order to be chayiv is for chatas. But whenever there's Makkos, then you chayiv even from mashma. Okay, and then we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says a bunch of different cases where you chayiv Makkos. Continuing from the first Mishnah, Bikurim, the Klein who eats Bikurim before the kriya, before the Yisroel read Rabbi over the Avi gets Makkos. The Klein eats kachik kadosh and puts the klam, even though he's allowed to eat kachik kadosh, but if he eats it, puts the klam outside of the curtains of the Mishkan or something that's outside the walls of the Harabayas, he's chayiv Makkos. Kachim kalim, a ma'isa sheni, which was eaten outside of the wall of Yerushalayim. Anyone can eat kachim kalim, depending on the kachim kalim, but often the Yisrael can eat kachim kalim, but only within the walls of Yerushalayim. If he eats outside, he's chayiv Makkos. Someone who breaks the bone of a Karm Pesach is chayiv Makkos, but only provided that the Karm Pesach is tor. Those are all the cases where you chayiv Makkos. Now, then the Mishnah says a few cases where you're not chayiv Makkos. If you do noisa, if you leave over a carbon, you're not chayiv Makkos, because as mentioned in the previous Gemara, it's allowed to say. And if you break a carbon pesach, the bone of a carbon pesach, which is tummy, you don't get Makkos, because it says that that's in the boy v'loy b'psol, and I was only in a kasha the animal, not in a pasol, like a carbon pesach. Sorry. And finally, when it comes to noitel aim al someone's oivan shiloch hakan didn't send the mother. So here we're machlokes. The Chacham says you do get Makkos. The Chacham say no, as long as you have the option, or as long as you send the bird, you don't get Makkos. But it's allowed. Let's say Torah says lo yisika aim al shalech tashalach. But if you have the possibility of sending, or right, so then you don't get Makkos allowed in Nitlaseh. Yehuda says it's not allowed in Nitlaseh, and as Rashi explains, because he holds that it's not allowed in Nitlaseh. The Torah is just saying don't take the bird, rather send it, not send it if you take it. It's just a regular lav and aseh, which is kiadodin. It's not a lav and nitik laseh. The aseh is always there. So it's not that he argues with the category of lav and nitik laseh not getting Makkos. He just holds that the shiur hakan doesn't fall into the category. Shiur hakan is a regular lav, which has an assay as well, but it's not a mythic assay. So that's the Mishnah. So then the Gemara has, first of all, the statement of Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan says, you should know that this Mishnah, at the beginning of the Mishnah, it says that Yichai Makkos for eating Bikurim before Kriya isn't Divrakal. It's not L'Kula Alma. It's only Rabbi Kiva. The Mishnah is stating the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, but the Chacham actually argue and say that only Hanocha Makalas. The Kohen's only gets Makkos eating Bikurim if you ate it before it's placed next to the Mizbeach. Once it's placed next to the Mizbeach, even if you haven't done Kriya, you can, there's no Makkos. So the Gemara then asks the Kasha, why say it's Rabbi Kiva, which we don't even know that Rabbi Kiva holds this, and I have to kind of take your word for it that this is what Rabbi Kiva says. If Shimon the Peirush says in the Braisa that Bikurim is not allowed to be eaten until the Kriya, until the Yisroel reads the Rami Ovidavi over it. The Gemara answers, Taka, that's true. Could have said it in the name of Shimon, but that's the Chiddush. Shimon, we know there's a Braisa. The Chiddush is that even Rabbi Kiva Taka holds that Shimon. It's not just Rabbi Shimon who argues in the Chacham. Both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kiva argue with the Chacham and say the Kriya Makelis. You know that it is allowed to eat it before. And then the Gemara asks, where my Rabbi Shimon? And the Gemara brings a long Braisa which goes through a whole bunch of different things. Starts off with Bikurim. At the end of the passage is Trumas Yadcha, referring to Bikurim. And the Pashtas, the pasuk saying don't eat it outside of the wall, but it can't be saying that because it's kavachayim from Ma'isa Sheni, which is kal. So if Ma'isa Sheni can't be eaten, for sure Bikurim can't be. So therefore, the brides understand that Bikurim is that when it says Trumas Yadcha, and it's telling you don't eat Bikurim, it doesn't mean don't eat Bikurim outside of Yerushalayim. That's already understood from a kavachayim. But rather, don't eat Bikurim before Kriya. The Kohen is not allowed to eat Truma before the Kriya. That's how we explain that, and that's the Reb Shimon that we're referring to. And then we continue with a long brisa talking about all sorts of different things. And basically, the brisa goes like this, and it says, Trumas Yadcha Bikurim, as mentioned earlier. The Dovid is referring to Toida Shlam, and again, it can't be talking about Kipshute eating outside of the wall because we know that from Kavachayim from Ma'isa Sheni. So it must be that the pasuk is telling you that even those people who are allowed to eat Toida Shlamim shouldn't eat it before Zrika. And if you do, you get Makkos. The Chayr is Abachayr. Right? Now we have Kavachayim. In other words, it can't be telling me that you're not allowed to eat the B'chayr outside of Yerushalayim. That's learned from Ma'isa. It also can't be telling me that even the Kohen who's allowed to eat the B'chayr shouldn't eat it before Zrika because that's a Kavachayim from Taida. So what must it be saying? It must be talking that a Zar can't eat the B'chayr after Zrika. That must be the Chiddush. When it says B'karcha B'tzoincha, that refers to Chatas and Asham. And here too, Rav Shimon says, what's it coming to tell me? It can't be telling me that outside of the wall because come from Ma'isa. The fact that someone who's allowed to eat the chatas v'asham shouldn't eat it before zrika, that can be learned from Taida Shlam. If it's coming to tell me that the Yisroel, the Zar, is not allowed to eat it even after zrika, that's a kavachim from Bechor that he's not allowed it. So what must the pasuk, when he says chatas v'asham in this pasuk, what must he be telling me? He's coming telling you then that you're not allowed to eat chatas v'asham. There's a lav and there's malchus for someone who eats chatas and asham after zrika. Chutz l'klein, meaning we only know outside of Yerushalayim, but chutz l'klein is from the extra, from the fact that this is said in the pasuk, which is a chiddush. So you get Makkos. Then the pasuk in the Dorech refers to oil, and here too we go through the whole same seder. What's talking about? Not chutz l'chayma is kavachim from Ma'isa. The fact that a kohen can't eat it before zrika is kavachim from Taida Shlam. The fact that a zar can't eat it after zrika is kavachim from Bechor. The fact that a kohen is not allowed to eat it chutz l'kloim, kavachim chatas v'asham. Alamai must be a new lab that kavachim is not allowed to eat it ki huzeh. He's not allowed to eat it even bifnei. I just want to point out one thing, which I didn't mention in the main share, is that some of these limudim over here of Shimon are needed according to everybody, meaning according to in our Mishnah at the beginning of Eilein Aloikin, we spoke. Sorry, no, in our Mishnah right over here, we spoke about kachim chutz l'kloim and kachim kalim chutz l'kloim. So it's just important to know that these, although we bring in this brisa by the way, to explain Reb Shimon ben Negei to Bikurim, it's really, these also serve as psukim, as haras, as the lavim, for some of the cases Taka discussed in our Mishnah, such as kachim chutz l'kloim, such as kachim kalim, ma'aseh chutz l'kloim kipshuta, but the drosh kachim kalim chutz l'kloim as well. Okay, stop over here. Bez Hashem, we'll see you all after Pesach. Okay.